I was 20 years old when I thought I had everything figured out. I had a beautiful, intelligent girlfriend, and we were in a committed relationship. At least, I thought we were. She was an identical twin with her sister. And when I say identical, I mean fucking identical. They looked the same in every way, right down to their clothing and mannerisms. It was uncanny. I was amazed at how well they pulled it off, enjoying the fact that nobody could tell them apart. They found it amusing and, at times, played tricks on people, switching places and confusing even their closest friends. In the beginning, I just thought it was some quirky part of their dynamic. But after a while, I started noticing something more, something I didn't fully understand at the time. We had been together for a while, and I thought things were going great. One evening, I went over to my girlfriend's place as planned. We had a quiet evening, catching up and spending time together. After a while, we hooked up. It was a natural progression of our intimacy, and I was enjoying the afterglow of the moment. Everything felt perfect, or at least it did at the time. As I lay there beside her, still basking in the warmth of the moment, I heard the front door open and shut. It was a familiar sound, but it didn't register in my foggy post-intimacy state. She looked at me, and before I could process what was going on, she casually said, "So, actual girlfriend's name is home." I froze. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. What did she mean by that? I looked at her, trying to understand, but she didn't seem to register that my world had just been rocked. Her twin sister had come home, and she had just casually mentioned it in a way that made it sound completely normal. But it wasn't normal to me. It wasn't normal that I was in her bed, having just been intimate with her, only to find out that her sister had been around all along. I tried to process what she was saying, but the more I thought about it, the more confused I became. It hit me like a sudden wave of nausea. What had just happened? Who had I actually been with? My heart started to race, and the uneasy feeling in my gut intensified. It was too late now to backtrack, but I was blindsided. I thought I had been with the girl I had been dating for months, but now I was questioning everything. Was it possible that I had been with her sister instead? The two of them were that identical. It wasn't hard to imagine how I could have made such a mistake, but the realization came too quickly. It wasn't just a playful trick they'd pulled before, it was something much more serious. I tried to ask her about it, but my mind was foggy from the adrenaline and confusion. She simply shrugged it off, as if nothing had happened. But for me, everything had changed in an instant. My trust had been shattered. How could I not have known? How could I have been with the wrong person, the wrong twin, and not even noticed? It wasn't just a mistake. I was being tricked, manipulated, and I didn't even realize it until it was too late. The rest of the evening passed in a haze. I barely registered the words she said next. It was as if everything had become muffled. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, that something had gone terribly wrong. But at the time, I didn't know how to address it. All I knew was that I felt like I had lost control of the situation, and I had no idea who I could trust anymore. I lay there beside her, still in shock, trying to make sense of the tangled mess I had just stepped into. I didn't know if I should confront her about it, or if I should just pretend nothing had happened. The night dragged on, and I tried to push the feeling of betrayal out of my mind. But no matter how much I tried to ignore it, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that everything between us had just changed. What was supposed to be a relaxing evening had turned into a nightmare I wasn't ready for. The confusion, the doubts, and the betrayal weighed heavily on me. I had never thought I would find myself in this kind of situation. I had trusted her completely, but now I wasn't even sure who I had been with. All I knew was that I couldn't go on pretending things were fine when they clearly weren't. The morning after that night, I was still grappling with everything that had happened. I felt like I had been blindsided, trapped in a web that I didn't even know existed. She had simply shrugged off the confusion, and I, still processing the night's events, couldn't bring myself to fully confront her. Part of me wanted to ignore what had happened, to believe that I was overreacting, but deep down, I knew something had gone horribly wrong. I had been lied to, played like a fool, and worst of all, I hadn't even realized it until it was too late. The reality of it all hit me when she casually mentioned her sister again the following morning. "Oh, you're probably just confused. We look so alike," she said with a smile, as if it was a joke. But for me, it was anything but funny. She had tricked me. Her identical twin sister had taken my place in the bed the night before, and I hadn't even noticed. As time went on, the guilt I felt for not noticing the difference between them ate at me. But then it hit me. Why should I have noticed? They were identical twins. Their facial features. How would you feel if your partner hid their affair for months or even years? Write in the comments. Features were identical. Their body types were identical. Their haircuts were identical. They dressed similarly, spoke similarly, and even moved in nearly identical ways. How could anyone, especially someone as physically and emotionally drained as I was, have noticed the difference between them in that moment? But according to her, it was my fault. Somehow, I had become the bad guy for not noticing. She tried to make me feel guilty for being confused, as if I had some responsibility to distinguish between two people who were literal genetic clones. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized how ridiculous it all was. I had been manipulated, used, and played in a sick game I hadn't been aware I was even participating in. And now, I was being blamed for it. Her sister hadn't just tricked me into bed once. She had taken advantage of the situation repeatedly, knowing exactly how far she could push me. The worst part was that I hadn't even realized it. They had both been in on it, but the moment I found out, it was suddenly my fault for not noticing. The more I tried to defend myself, the more I was made to feel guilty for not picking up on the smallest of details that would have told me the truth. And it wasn't just her sister who was part of the deception. My girlfriend had let it happen, allowed her twin to pull off the trick, and never once stopped her. She had enabled the game, participated in it, and now I was left with the consequences. She was acting as if it was no big deal, as if I should just laugh it off and move on, but I couldn't. My trust in her, in both of them, had been shattered beyond repair. I felt like I had been betrayed by the one person I trusted most, and instead of owning up to it, she made me feel like the villain for simply being deceived. The situation became increasingly toxic. She continued to insist that I was overreacting, that I was being paranoid, and that it wasn't such a big deal. But deep down, I knew I could never look at either of them the same way again. The person I had been intimate with the night before wasn't even my girlfriend. It was her sister. I had been lied to in the worst way possible, and it felt like my entire world was crumbling around me. Eventually, I confronted both of them. I asked her, point blank, why she had allowed this to happen, why she hadn't said anything, why she had let her sister trick me. The response I got was something I'll never forget. She told me that they had their own language, their own understanding, and that I shouldn't have expected to pick up on the nuances. To them, it was a joke, a game they played to amuse themselves. But to me, it was a devastating betrayal. It wasn't just about the physical act of intimacy. It was about trust, about respect, and about honesty. And in that moment, I realized that I had been completely blind to the reality of my relationship with both of them. I had thought it was special, that it was real, but in truth, it had all been a facade. They had used their identical appearance to manipulate me, and in doing so, they destroyed everything I thought I knew. The more I reflected on it, the more I realized just how deep the manipulation went. It wasn't just a one-time mistake. It was a pattern, a system they had both been complicit in, using their identical appearance to deceive me at every turn. And somehow, I was the one being blamed for not noticing. Eventually, I had to walk away. The relationship had become toxic, unhealthy, and built on lies. The foundation of trust had been shattered, and I knew there was no way to rebuild it. No matter how many times I tried to justify their actions, no matter how many excuses I made for them, I couldn't get past the betrayal. The worst part was that, even after all of this, they continued to act like I was the one in the wrong. I was the one who had been tricked, manipulated, and deceived, but somehow, I was the one being made to feel guilty for it. The twin sisters had their own bond, their own world, and I was just an outsider, caught in the middle of their game. In the end, I left. I couldn't stay in a relationship built on deceit, and I couldn't trust either of them anymore. I had been manipulated by people I thought I knew, people I thought I could trust, and I had to walk away from it all.